We are social creatures. That's true. But it's also true that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And too often, we enter into relationships before we've even taken the time to understand who we are, what we value, or what we truly need. Living alone is not about isolation. It's about alignment. It's about knowing how to sit with yourself, how to listen to your own thoughts without distraction, and how to build a life that reflects your core values without compromise. When you live alone, you are forced to confront the silence. And in that silence, you learn. You learn that happiness is not given, it is built. You learn to create rituals that belong to you, choices that are yours alone. You discover that being able to eat dinner by yourself, laugh by yourself, and even cry by yourself is not weakness, it's strength. It means you are not running from solitude, you're growing inside it. Most people fear being alone because they associate it with being unloved. But love that depends on someone else's presence is fragile. Love that grows from self-awareness, self-respect, and self-understanding is solid. Relationships that thrive are born from two whole people, not two broken ones seeking to fill each other's gaps. When you live alone, you begin to question everything. Why do I believe what I believe? What makes me feel truly alive? What am I tolerating that I shouldn't be? These questions rarely surface when you are entangled in constant companionship. Living alone offers space for those questions to arise and for the answers to shape your future. It's easy to lose yourself in relationships, easy to absorb someone else's preferences, values, and even their path. But when you live alone, there is no noise to drown your voice. You wake up on your own terms. You move through your day with intention. You don't apologize for your pace, your dreams, or your solitude. And when you do enter a relationship from this place, not out of need, but out of choice, it's grounded, not desperate. We have been taught that relationships complete us. But what if you are already complete? What if living alone isn't the absence of love, but the presence of wholeness? There is no shame in being alone. In fact, the world needs more people who are comfortable with themselves, because only those people can truly connect with others without losing their identity in the process. Living alone is not a rejection of love, it's preparation for it. It's saying, before I give myself to anyone else, I want to know exactly who I am. That's not selfish, that's wise. Because the person who can enjoy life alone will never settle for a relationship that offers less than peace, respect, and growth. So don't rush to fill the space. Use it to build, to grow, to understand. When you learn to live alone, really live, joyfully, intentionally, courageously, you no longer fear relationships. You simply don't need them to feel alive. 5 keynotes of the speech Living Alone build self-awareness, clarity, and emotional independence. Solitude creates space to align your life with your authentic values. Wholeness comes from within, not from being in a relationship. Time alone strengthens your identity, boundaries, and life direction. A healthy relationship is a choice, not a necessity when you are already fulfilled on your own. Living alone builds self-awareness, clarity, and emotional independence. It is one of the most underrated yet powerful experiences a person can have. When you live alone, everything you do becomes a mirror reflecting back who you are. Not who people want you to be, not who you're pretending to be, but who you truly are at your core. This environment strips away the distractions and roles we unconsciously take on when we're constantly surrounded by others. You are no longer a partner, a roommate, a parent, or a friend in those moments. You are simply you. And that's where self-awareness begins, not in performing a role, but in observing yourself without the mask. When you wake up in a space that is entirely yours, every choice becomes intentional. No one is telling you what to do, and no one is expecting anything from you in that moment. You begin to notice your patterns, how you spend your mornings, what habits you fall into, where your mind goes when it's quiet. These things might seem small, but they are the building blocks of your self-understanding. Maybe you discover that you like to read in silence at sunrise, or maybe you realize you've been numbing your emotions with noise. The point is, you're finally in a place where you can see it clearly, and clarity only comes when the noise dies down. Living alone creates that quiet. Most of our lives are filled with constant motion, conversations, opinions, drama, demands. But when you're alone, that volume drops. And when it does, you begin to hear your own inner voice again. You start to differentiate between what you truly want and what you've been conditioned to chase. Do you really want that job, or was that someone else's dream? Do you really enjoy those routines? Or have you just been going through the motions to keep up appearances? This clarity isn't always comfortable. In fact, can be unsettling at first. But discomfort is often a signal that growth is around the corner. The greatest breakthroughs in life rarely come during moments of chaos. They come in the stillness. And living alone gives you that stillness in abundance. You have the time and space to ask yourself the tough questions. Who am I? What do I believe? What am I afraid of? These questions don't always have easy answers, but the fact that you're asking them is a sign that you're finally paying attention. That awareness begins to change how you live. You stop chasing validation. You stop tolerating things that drain you. You start designing a life that reflects your values rather than reacting to the lives of others. And perhaps most importantly, living alone cultivates emotional independence. Emotional independence isn't about rejecting support or connection. It's about not being emotionally dependent on others for your sense of self, your mood, or your direction. It means you can hold space for your own feelings without needing someone else to rescue you from them. It means you can experience loneliness without being afraid of it. You begin to see loneliness not as a void, but as a teacher, a moment where you're learning to be with yourself fully and honestly. That doesn't mean living alone is always easy. It's not. There will be nights when silence feels heavy. There will be days when you miss the comfort of shared space. But those are the very moments where your strength is forged. Because instead of reaching outward for distraction or codependency, you learn to go inward. You learn to soothe yourself, challenge yourself, and uplift yourself. You begin to develop the emotional tools that many people spend their whole lives avoiding. And when you live like this, consciously, intentionally, independently, you start showing up differently in every area of your life. You stop clinging, you stop performing, you lead with authenticity because you're no longer afraid of being alone with your truth. That self-awareness, that clarity, that emotional strength, it becomes your foundation. And from that foundation, everything else in your life starts to align. Solitude creates space to align your life with your authentic values. When you're constantly surrounded by people, opinions, and expectations, it becomes incredibly easy to lose touch with what actually matters to you. You adapt, often unconsciously, to fit into someone else's rhythm. Their needs, their preferences, their timelines slowly begin to shape your own. You compromise in small ways day by day until eventually you can't quite tell where you end and someone else begins. That's not a judgment, it's human nature. But it's also why solitude is so essential. Because only in solitude do you start to strip back all of that noise and tune into your internal compass. When you live alone, you get to observe your life in its rawest, most unfiltered form. No distractions, no performance, no roles to play. It's just you and your decisions, what you eat when you sleep, how you spend your time. It all reflects back to you what your actual priorities are. And sometimes what you find can be surprising. You may discover that you've been living out a story someone else wrote for you. Maybe your career path was a product of family pressure. Maybe your routines were built around pleasing others. Maybe your sense of purpose has been borrowed rather than discovered. Solitude forces those realizations to the surface because there's no one else around to keep distracting you from them. And when those realizations come, they become an invitation to realignment. You begin to ask, what are the values I want to live by? Not the ones I've inherited or adopted for the sake of fitting in. Do I value freedom, creativity, integrity, health, stillness? Am I making choices that reflect those values, or am I compromising them every day? Without solitude, those questions rarely get asked. But when you're alone, you can no longer ignore the discomfort of misalignment. You feel it in your bones when your actions and your values are out of sync. That discomfort becomes the motivation to start shifting things slowly, intentionally, until your external world reflects your internal truth. Solitude also allows you to experiment. You get to try things without judgment, without commentary, without interference. You get to figure out what genuinely excites you, what energizes you, and what drains you. You begin to understand the difference between obligation and inspiration. You might try new routines, explore new interests, or even change the way you structure your days. And in that process, you gather data, not from others, but from your own lived experience. That data tells you what kind of life actually works for you, not just what looks good from the outside. When you live alone, even the smallest acts become powerful signals. The books you choose to read, the music you play, the way you organize your space, all of it speaks to the values you hold. Are you creating a life that honors peace, or are you filling your space with noise? Are you nourishing your body with care or rushing through meals and distraction? These daily choices become opportunities to live in alignment. And over time, those small aligned choices build momentum. They become habits. They shape your identity, not the one others expect from you, but the one that feels true. One of the most powerful things that happens in solitude is that you stop pretending. There's no one to impress, no one to perform for. You can let go of the masks you've worn in relationships, in workspaces, in society. You begin to relate to yourself in a much more honest way. You see your flaws, your fears, your strengths, and your potential. And from that place of honesty, you start making decisions that are more grounded and more sustainable. You stop chasing what's popular and start pursuing what's meaningful. Living in alignment doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means life becomes yours. The choices you make, the relationships you invest in, the paths you pursue, they all come from a place of self-knowing. And that self-knowing is born in solitude. Because it's only when you remove the noise of the world that you can hear the quiet wisdom within. That wisdom is not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It whispers. And solitude is how you finally hear it. Wholeness comes from within, not from being in a relationship. This is a truth that many people understand intellectually but struggle to embody emotionally. We're taught from a young age to seek completion in others. Movies, books, and even well-meaning family members reinforce the idea that we're not truly whole until we find our other half. But this narrative, while romantic, is deeply misleading. It sets people up to chase relationships for the wrong reasons, not from a place of fullness, but from a place of emptiness they hope someone else will fill. That kind of search leads to dependency, not connection. And the only real cure for that emptiness is internal. When you live alone, you are confronted with that inner space, whatever it holds. At first, that can be uncomfortable. You might feel a void where attention, validation, or companionship used to be. But instead of rushing to fill that space, solitude invites you to explore it, to understand it, to take responsibility for it. What you start to realize is that the discomfort isn't a sign that something is missing. It's a signal that you haven't yet built the inner architecture of wholeness. And solitude gives you the time, space, and clarity to begin construction. Wholeness begins when you stop looking outside of yourself for permission to be enough. When you're alone, there's no one to constantly reassure you, no one to validate your choices, no one to applaud your smallest victories. At first, that can feel like loss. But in time, you begin to build that validation from within. You learn how to acknowledge your own efforts. You learn how to soothe your own fears. You learn how to sit with doubt without needing someone else to talk you through it. That process of learning to self-support is what creates the emotional infrastructure of a whole person. In solitude, your worth no longer hinges on whether someone else sees it. You stop measuring your value by how lovable, attractive, or desirable others find you. Instead, your sense of worth begins to root itself in something far more stable, your principles, your integrity, your ability to show up for yourself every day. You begin to define yourself not by who wants you, but by who you are when no one's watching. And that kind of self-definition is powerful. It doesn't crumble when a relationship ends or when someone disappoints you. It holds steady because it's not built on anyone else's opinion. When you live alone, your attention turns inward. You become your own witness, observing your thoughts, patterns, and behaviors without judgment. And in that observation, you start to make different choices. You begin to ask, am I being kind to myself? Am I living in alignment with my values? Am I treating myself the way I want to be treated by others? These aren't surface level questions. They are the deep foundational questions that shape how you relate not only to yourself, but eventually to others. And they only arise when you spend enough time alone to actually reflect. One of the most powerful outcomes of building inner wholeness is that it changes how you enter relationships. You no longer come from a place of needing someone to fix you, rescue you, or complete you. You're not looking for a savior. You're looking for a partner, not someone to lean on, but someone to walk beside. That shift transforms your standards. You stop settling for half-hearted connections because you're no longer afraid of being alone. You're not choosing out of fear. You're choosing out of strength. And that kind of choosing leads to deeper, more meaningful relationships. Living alone becomes a kind of training ground for this. It teaches you how to be present with yourself without reaching for distraction or escape. It teaches you how to self-regulate, how to cultivate joy from within, how to handle hard days without falling apart. And as you practice these things day by day, you begin to embody a sense of completeness that is unshakable. You don't just tell yourself you're whole, you feel it. You know it. And once you do, your life begins to operate on a different frequency. You're no longer chasing people to fix your loneliness. You're creating a life so full and aligned that when someone does join you, it's not to fill a gap. It's to expand the joy that's already there. Time alone strengthens your identity, boundaries, and life direction. In the absence of others, you are offered the rare opportunity to see yourself without distortion. When no one is around to influence your decisions, you begin to get a clearer picture of who you are, not who you've been told to be, not who you think others want, but who you are when no one is watching. Living alone becomes the ultimate mirror. It reflects back your true preferences, your real values, and your authentic rhythms. It becomes much easier to recognize what feels natural and what feels forced when you're the only one making the decisions. Identity in its truest form is not something you adopt from the world. It's something you uncover from within. But in most relationships, we unconsciously adapt. We become what's needed. We shift and mold ourselves to preserve harmony, to feel accepted, or to avoid conflict. That's not always a bad thing, but over time, it can blur the lines between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. When you live alone, those blurry lines begin to sharpen. You notice what you're drawn to when no one else is influencing your choices. What do you eat when no one is watching? What kind of environment do you create when it's entirely up to you? What do your mornings look like when you're not adjusting to someone else's routine? The answers to these questions reveal parts of your identity that may have been hidden under the surface for years. Boundaries, too, are forged in solitude. You start to understand where your limits are because you finally have space to feel what it's like to be uninterrupted. You learn what drains you and what energizes you. And from that awareness, you begin to set clearer standards for what you allow into your life. It becomes more obvious when something or someone is disrupting your peace because you've experienced what that peace feels like consistently. And once you've tasted that peace, you become much more protective of it. You realize that saying no isn't selfish. It's essential. It's how you preserve the life you've worked to build and the identity you've taken time to uncover. Without the constant noise of others' opinions, you also begin to refine your sense of direction. Most people move through life reacting rather than creating. They follow paths because they were told it's the right way. They take jobs, start relationships, or pursue goals that sound good on paper but don't actually align with their internal compass. Time alone allows you to slow down and ask, is this what I really want? Or is this just what I think I'm supposed to want? When you live alone, you gain the time to reflect, to pause, to listen. You gain the clarity to notice whether you're walking someone else's path or your own. That sense of direction doesn't always come quickly. It often begins with confusion, with not knowing, with feeling lost. But solitude gives you the space to sit with that uncertainty instead of rushing to escape it. And in sitting with it, insights begin to emerge. You try new things. You explore new ideas. You follow curiosity instead of obligation. And through that process, you begin to carve out a life that feels uniquely yours. You stop living for approval. You start living with purpose. Living alone also forces you to take responsibility for your life in a way that being in a relationship often shields you from. There's no one else to blame, no one else to clean up the mess, no one else to fill your calendar. You have to learn how to structure your days, how to motivate yourself, how to stay grounded even when things get difficult. And in that responsibility, you grow stronger. You become more capable, more focused, more aware. You begin to trust yourself, not just in theory, but in practice, because you've seen what you can do when no one is there to hold your hand. The more time you spend alone, the more you realize how many of your past compromises were made from a place of disconnection from your true self. And now, with space and stillness, those compromises become visible. You start to reclaim parts of yourself that were lost in the noise. And with each piece you reclaim, your identity becomes more defined, your boundaries become stronger, and your direction becomes clearer. You're no longer drifting, you're steering. You're not living on autopilot, you're making conscious decisions. All of it begins with time alone. That space, that solitude, becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. A healthy relationship is a choice, not a necessity when you are already fulfilled on your own. Most people enter relationships hoping to gain something they believe they lack: validation, love, security, identity. And because of this, the relationship becomes a kind of transaction, a trade of needs rather than a meeting of two whole individuals. When you're not fulfilled on your own, you're likely to enter relationships from a place of lack, which creates imbalance and dependency. But when you're already grounded, already content, already clear on who you are, you don't seek a relationship to complete you. You choose it because it aligns with your values and enriches your already meaningful life. Living alone teaches you this truth in a way that no external advice ever could. Day by day, you learn to take care of yourself emotionally, mentally, physically. You build a routine that reflects your needs. You handle your own lows and celebrate your own highs. You become your own emotional home. And when you get to that point, you're no longer desperate to find someone to fill a gap. You're no longer looking for someone to carry your emotional weight, fix your past, or define your future. You've already done the work, or at least started it, and that makes any future relationship a conscious decision rather than an unconscious coping mechanism. When you feel whole, your standards shift. You no longer tolerate dynamics that are unhealthy, draining, or rooted in neediness. You don't engage in relationships out of fear of being alone because you've experienced the richness that solitude can offer. You know what peace feels like, and you're unwilling to trade it for chaos, even if that chaos comes with moments of connection. You're able to distinguish between real intimacy and emotional convenience. That discernment only becomes sharp when you've spent enough time with yourself to understand your inner world. Being fulfilled on your own also changes the way you love. You begin to love without possession, without control, without desperation. You give because you want to, not because you're afraid of being left. You allow the other person to exist as a full human being, not as a solution to your problems, but as a partner on your journey. This kind of love doesn't trap, it frees, it doesn't suffocate, it supports, it thrives in openness, honesty, and mutual respect. And the foundation for this kind of love is built in the quiet moments of being alone with yourself, getting real about your patterns, your triggers, and your expectations. There's also a kind of freedom that comes from knowing that your well-being is not dependent on anyone else. That doesn't mean you close yourself off from connection. It means you're careful about who you let in. It means you're not so hungry for love that you accept crumbs. It means you no longer settle for surface level attention or shallow companionship. Instead, you wait for something real, something grounded, something that complements the life you've built rather than disrupts it. Solitude gives you the space to see your past relationship patterns clearly. You begin to understand why you stayed too long, why you ignored red flags, why you felt incomplete. And with that understanding, you gain the power to choose differently. You become more mindful of your emotional needs, more honest about your boundaries, more intentional with your energy. You stop making choices from fear and start making them from clarity. And one of the clearest truths that emerges is that love, when it's real, enhances your life. It doesn't define it. When you're fulfilled on your own, you stop viewing singlehood as a waiting period. You don't treat it like a gap to be filled or a phase to be escaped. You start to see it as a full chapter of life, one rich with learning, creation, healing, and joy. You don't rush into the next connection just because it's available. You evaluate whether it's aligned. You ask deeper questions. Does this relationship elevate me or drain me? Does it inspire growth or create dependency? Does it add peace or introduce confusion? These questions are easier to answer when your internal world is already stable. A healthy relationship then becomes a bonus, not a requirement. It becomes something you choose to participate in because you want to share your life, not because you're looking for someone to give it meaning. And that choice, rooted in independence and fulfillment, creates a dynamic that is sustainable, respectful, and free of unnecessary pressure. It's the difference between needing someone and simply wanting them, between clinging and connecting. between filling a void and building something real. That difference begins with learning how to stand strong alone. The power of living alone lies not in isolation, but in transformation. It is in that quiet space, free from distraction, expectation, and external influence, that we come to know ourselves fully. We learn to build emotional strength, discover our true values, and construct a life that reflects who we really are. Through solitude, we uncover the foundation of self-awareness, create unshakable clarity, and develop the kind of wholeness that no relationship can provide. It is from this place of fulfillment, not from lack or loneliness, that we gain the strength to form relationships rooted in choice, not need. Living alone isn't the absence of connection, it's the presence of self. And only those who truly know how to stand strong on their own can ever love freely, live authentically, and lead a life driven by purpose rather than approval.